This is Lenore. She's this beautiful, almost childlike vampire, but she's definitely not innocent.
Hi, I'm Lydia, and today I'm talking about my Lenore cosplay from Castlevania.
In season 4, she wears this beautiful blue dress, and it has this sheer grayish black layer underneath it and a matching veil. Looking up close, we've got the base dress, this blue part here, which could be 2 pieces, could be 1 piece. And then we've got this almost undershirt layer that's sheer. And she also has her signature jewelry that she wears in previous seasons. We've got these matching booties. We've got a petticoat here also underneath. She's also wearing gloves that match her undershirt and veil. She has a comb in her hair and these adorable little ear cuffs. To start making the base dress, I used Simplicity 5006, one of my favorite patterns, and I used both the bodice pattern and the main A-line skirt pattern. For the front of the bodice, the only change I had to make was reshaping the bust and adding the little V in the front, but otherwise I used the pattern pretty much as is. You can see that I did add boning to all of the seams and a little bit more to the front to keep that V shape supported. I did use pre-made plastic boning with casing. The bodice does not serve as a corset. It does not cinch me at all. It's just for support. I did wear a corset underneath for further support though. This is something I made years ago and it just happened to fit the theme. Now to address the fabric. When you look at it, your first impression is probably that it's satin, and that's probably actually what they were thinking. But when I looked at it, I thought, based on the way the colors and the shadows moved and the shine on it, I just kept thinking this looks like velvet.
So I'm actually pretty happy with how the velvet turned out. As you can see, it does have that similar shine effect to it, but it's very matte. The challenge to this was that I actually had to buy a stretch velvet because it was the closest color that I could find. So I had to be very careful to stabilize it so the seams wouldn't pucker, and then I cut everything in the same direction so you wouldn't get different levels of shine across the panels.
Here's another look of the finished bodice with the velvet in different lighting. You can also see in this image the beginnings of the undershirt. In the source, she is technically wearing jewelry that's separate because she wears that with her previous outfits. But what makes it so difficult is that it looks like it's permanently attached to her collar and there's this little cutout section. So how do you make the necklace perfectly line up with this cutout? Well, what I ended up doing was actually permanently attaching the jewelry on so it wouldn't shift. I did this by cutting out the shape of the jewelry out of fabric with my Cricut and then directly sewing that onto the collar. And then I cut out the shape of the heart so that the heart would stay in place. And then on top of that, I cut out leather that I painted silver and then glued it onto the matching fabric shape. To achieve the scalloped edge on the organza, I used sticky wash-away stabilizer and used the satin stitch on my sewing machine and then cut out the excess organza from the edge. I actually ended up turning the undershirt into an underdress because when I put the dress on over it, it tended to shift up. So I made just a giant rectangle and gathered it to the bottom so I can pull down on that layer and it makes the top smooth. But yeah, this is what the final result of that looks like. Next, I made the belt. I also used my Cricut to cut out leather and I tooled it a little bit for some dimension, and then I painted it silver, added some highlights and lowlights, then I glued it onto a basic belt that I made out of satin.
As for the skirt, like I said, I used the same pattern that I used for the bodice. It's a simple A-line silhouette. I had to make sure that the velvet was all cut in the same direction, and for the hem, I used horsehair braid to sort of preserve these nice little folds that you get when it hangs down. And this is what it looks like without the petticoat.
The petticoat was pretty simple. I just used a cheap white satin and I made this pattern here but without the borders to make it simpler.
And also you can see close up of the bottom layer. It's just one layer of ruffles, and I finished the edge with the rolled hem stitch on my serger.
Next up is the gloves. I used a similar technique I used for the underdress. This meant stabilizing it with the sticky stabilizer first, then cutting it out, then sewing it together so that it wouldn't shift around under my machine. And then I also did the same scallop edge. The shoes are probably the hardest part of this costume because they were such a strange shape. I made shoe covers out of the same velvet. They turned out alright. I don't have any other in progress photos. It was weird. They're okay. And on the other end of the spectrum is the veil, which was the easiest part. I made the hair clip the same way I made all of the other jewelry. I attached a giant piece of organza that I hemmed on my serger. Last but not least is the adorable little ear cuff in the matching green. I literally just took craft wire and wound it through a prosthetic ear.
Well, that was my Lenore from Castlevania. I really loved how this turned out. And I also like that the blue part of the dress is a separate piece so it can be worn alone as an evening dress. Bonus! Alright everyone, bye! Listen to the petticoat sounds. ASMR.